I need a worldview that keeps me here. It's got to be interesting for me, or why would I even stick around? It's not interesting enough for me to kind of be a little insignificant being at the, cowering under the wrath of some unseen God. It's much more interesting for me to think that maybe I'm in on it, and maybe we're all in on it. And then maybe we could just all play with a wink and a nod.
Hello, friends and lovers. Welcome back to the show. I'm so stoked to be hanging out with a really beautiful, compassionate soul, my friend Kasem. I met Kasem through Daniel, my partner. They've been friends for over 20 years through some really wild times of their life. And I've gotten to know Kasem since we've been together, but really especially over the last year. Kasem's at this really interesting inflection point, this time of intense change of his life. He most recently has been a really successful entrepreneur, but I think recently in the last year, he's been going through integrating a lot of what many of us are grappling with right now, all the disconnection in our culture. And I see him in this trust fall with the universe right now, letting go of a lot of the things that used to define who he thinks he is and who the world thinks he is, and finding a new way forward that's aligned with his spirit and aligned with this little jewel of a meme of wisdom that humans have been passing down for hundreds of thousands of years across generations about what it means to be human, fundamentally, what we're doing here. And I so value the way that Kasem sees the world. Coming from an evangelical childhood and now being a practicing Buddhist for 13 years, he articulates things in a way that feel like a homecoming. We were on a walk recently and he was like, people have told me that I'm very soothing to listen to. And I was like, yes, I count myself one of those humans. Let's bottle it up. So this is such a tender conversation about the most universal journey that I think we can all undertake in this lifetime. The forgetting and the remembering that we are it and we have always been it. And everything else is a distraction from that. But it's also, we're asked to play in this human realm of material, of story, symbol, and how to do those both without holding either too tightly, how to walk through life with grace. Kasem is a beautiful example of that. And I am really happy that you're here to hang out with us and just wander through the universe and explore what it's all about. So here is Kasem. Could you describe a little bit the incarnation that you were born into, like what your family structure was?
Yeah. I was born in New Jersey to a immigrant mother from Puerto Rico. So she was born in 1950 in a town called Lares, which is actually now pretty well known for its ice cream. But it's a mountain town, and it was really, really, really impoverished. And she grew up as one of 8 kids. Her father would work on the farm for 30 cents a week, and sometimes he would get a chicken. He had a drinking problem and all of the things that kind of come with the stress of deep, deep poverty. And so, very, very humble beginnings, but they saw a promise of a future in the United States. Mm-hmm. And they made it happen. And they borrowed and begged and stole and got those 8 kids into the South Bronx.
Jeez.
My grandfather ended up working in a paint factory in the daytime and then studying English at night, and became proficient enough in English to convince the owner of the building that they were living at that he could be the superintendent and take care of the building. Like, the hustle is in the DNA. It's like, there's no choice. if it's sink or swim like that, you just flail your arms and kick your feet, and wherever it lands you, it's better than drowning. And then all the kids, those kids had all the opportunity to go to school. And
How old was your mom?
she was 11, yeah, when they moved here. And she didn't speak any English, so in the South Bronx, that's a rough start. Yeah, but my mom ended up going to Rutgers and became a nurse, and like, it was kind of all around badass. And then my father was born in Amman, Jordan, to a family of Palestinian refugees that migrated during the 40s into Jordan. And he came over to this country to study at Rutgers, which is where my mom and dad met. So he studied political science here, was, apparently very smart and charming and devilishly handsome, obviously. And yeah, they got it on, and I came out of that. And so I popped out in 1980, and I was in Jersey City, and we lived up there in the Northeast for a while. And my mom and dad had a very explosive relationship. And then there was a lot of religious undertones because she was raised very devout Catholic, and he was very devout Muslim. And they did not see eye to eye on many things. And they both had really sort of powder kegs inside of them in terms of temper. And so my mom had to split, and we split. So we moved down to the Panhandle of Florida. About the age of 5, I remember taking the Greyhound bus from Philadelphia down to Orlando. Very something's very seared into my brain about that trip. And we moved to the Panhandle of Florida because that's where my mom's closest sister was. They were stationed there at the Air Force Base. And that's basically where I grew up, in Pensacola, Florida. And then a few years later, my father died. And so I was really raised in the Deep South and pretty much culturally Puerto Rican, basically a total separation from my father's side. And I lived in a poor part of a rich part of town. That makes sense. So, and we did that because my mom knew what the school districts were like and wanted me to go to a good school. So we lived in a trailer park, but within the school zone of Gulf Breeze, which is a A+ school. And everyone who goes there is fairly wealthy. There's a handful of kids who are not.
Was there other Puerto Rican community?
Very small. There were certainly Central American, Mexicans, Nicaraguans, Hondurans. And I grew up around them because they would somehow come into my mom's orbit. And we would take families in sometimes. And so a lot of times, it would just be me and my mom after my brother left, but sometimes it'd be me and my mom and Pedro and Maria and their kid, Jorge, and they're actually sleeping in my bed and I'm sleeping on the couch. And that's cool because that's what we do. So my mom never went far from that immigrant point of view, and that never mattered to her. Documentation status, any of that stuff. It's what do you need? What can I help you do? Do you need a mattress? Do you need some food? Do you need me to go to the immigration office with you? Do you have a driver's license? All those kinds of things.
Sounds like Jesus.
Yeah, a little bit. She was a really good example in a lot of ways to just give me the shove in the right direction. And I think that's all you can really ask from a parent, especially a single parent. It's nobody's perfect. That can't be the expectation. If you have kids, you're going to traumatize them because we traumatize each other. And sometimes we can't help it because there's expectations built in the other person that nobody can help. So can you actually send the kid in the right direction with the skills to figure it out for themselves? Critical thinking skills, hustle, a honest and realistic view of what the world is, but still with a side of optimism.
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah. But she did it in the way that she lived. And I always knew that I was really deeply loved. There's no time where I ever questioned that at all. And she didn't even have to say it because I could see it and how hard she worked. So regardless of what it looks like when you end up kind of 35, burnt out, workaholic, with this bad relationship with money, You can easily turn around and be like, Mom, you did this to me. She just gave me a shove into the world. I was like, you gotta just be tough. People are gonna try to take you down. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not great, but you have to go out there and compete. And you have to actually be better than a lot of the people next to you who have the privileges that you don't have. So you've actually got to work twice as hard as everybody else just to get to, their level of reward.
I didn't expect to start here necessarily, but what you were just rapping about kind of makes me just want to ask you what your relationship to money is.
I think like most people, it's complicated. It's been a bit of a yo-yo. It's like the story of Buddha in reverse, where Buddha starts off with a lot of money and then decides that he should try to see what it's like to have nothing and figured out a way in the middle. I grew up in a household that was below the poverty line. And so I was in the game. I was hustling. I was making money for the family at like a really young age. And it was always something that seemed like a very important key to happiness. That's how I grew up, and that I didn't have it, which meant I couldn't be fully happy. And I think that was compounded with the fact that even though we were poor, I grew up in a rich community. And so the comparison was in front of me every day between what my everyday life was like, what my clothes were like, and what I was seeing around me. And when we got old enough to notice it for ourselves, the class that I found myself in some instances actually separated me from friends that I had had through elementary school that we were close. But now that it was apparent that they were rich and I was not rich, the way they would treat me would be different. Or when I'd go to my friends' houses who were really, really rich, I didn't know how to act. I used to feel like I was in a museum. I didn't know what the rules were. And they talked to their parents in ways I could never imagine talking to my... So I didn't even understand their relationship with their parents. So kind of my first understanding of money was, I see what it does to people. I don't have it, and I would not be living in a, one-bedroom apartment with my mom. My mom wouldn't have to work so hard. And so like a lot of my early prayers were like around praying for more money. And then my mom, as an example, was just like, I got old enough to where I understood that you don't pray for money, you make money. And God doesn't care about money. And like for all that we sing about the wealth and the streets of glass in heaven and all of the gold and all that, it's like God doesn't care about any of that. And God's not going to give that to you. You have to go earn that because that's of this world. And they never, they do now, of course, the prosperity gospel, but it was never about that. It was about a different kind of rich.
You said your mom told you that?
She told me that through how hard she worked. And she told me that through her discipline and instilling in me that my job was to go to school. It's like, you are a student. That is your job. You are to bring home good grades and you're to do these things. But as soon as I got old enough to say, all right, now I have some sort of skill, I have an able body, like let me try to go make some of that money because now I can pitch in. So, but I figured out with my mom just kind of how to hustle and to understand how just the human market works, why people want the things that they want, even rich people want. There's something they don't have. I just developed an knack for figuring out what that was or getting them to tell me what that was, and then I'd give it to them.
Can you give an example?
An example?
Yeah, of like that superpower.
Well, I guess it was kind of like what I was telling you earlier today. Because we were poor, I had to get all of the store brand stuff, and so I never had like Coca-Cola. So even just unpacking your lunch when you're poor and everyone around you is rich can be like a traumatic experience because they're pulling out the Lunchables and the Gushers, and I'm bringing like rice and beans. And I would guilt my mom into like making me a stupid white bread sandwich so that I could be like everyone else, which is really sad. But I think a lot of immigrants can actually tell that story about their lunches being a thing. But what I figured out through a fluke kind of was I had a store brand soda. It was kiwi lime or something like that, or kiwi strawberry, like a flavor that you can't find in a Coca-Cola product. And everyone was kind of like, hey, what is that? I've never seen that can before because I'm not poor. I don't buy that brand. Like, what is that? I was like, what flavor is that? And all of a sudden, the thing that they had been enjoying was no longer special or novel. So I started to trade and developed a network through like baseball cards and comic books. And pretty soon I was actually making enough money to like buy my meals for the week. And they're like, no, Mom, you don't have to worry about cooking this week because I was able to flip like 3 or 4 baseball cards and I've got some money and like, do you need gas in your car? And like, 14, 15 years old, that's without a dad, that's kind of like, okay, like I can do this, I can help out. And also, there's a game afoot. I figure something out about how people work, and the people who have it all still are wanting something. And in a weird way, they want what I have. So what do I have? The cool thing was my brother, who is 8 years older than I am, would work at like McDonald's. And this was when I was younger. And McDonald's would have these promotions whenever like Space Jam came out. If you got a Happy Meal, you would get a little pack of basketball cards. And in that pack of basketball cards was like Michael Jordan and like all of these like really rare kind of hologram cards. So my brother would kind of sneak a lot of those back home for me. And I knew the managers, and they would always sneak a couple more into the Happy Meal or whatever whenever I'd come by. So I ended up building this collection of what actually ended up being a pretty valuable commodity, like in the trading market, especially if they were in good shape, because a lot of times kids would did their catch up, I was like, so like for no cost to me, I would take those to school, and that's kind of how I got started. It was a long journey from there, because then I started working really hard and got a degree. I did all the things they tell you to do. I became a consultant and worked mostly with the military for a while. And a lot of times in school, high school, and even college, I was just like, unleash me. Like, I hated it because I saw, like, every year I'm sitting in this classroom. Mm-hmm. There's opportunity out there that I could, but I need this piece of paper. So, like, which one's going to get me paid the most? That one? Okay. Mm-hmm. What do I need to do to get it? That math? Can't do that math. What about you? What can I make a little less without that math? Okay, cool. So I found the path of least resistance through school and got my degree, which made my mom happy. As long as like, can you get a good job? I was like, yeah, it's in computers. Okay, well then you're fine. And then I started doing computer stuff just so that whatever it is in my life or my family was going to look like in the future, that I could continue that narrative that comes with being a part of coming from an immigrant background, which is every generation is better off than the next generation. That's a narrative we're given as young people. Yeah, especially if you're born in the United States, which I was, and both my parents were not. But if you're born here and you're given the opportunities to, go to school and pick and choose what you would like to do, and if you work hard enough, you can do all of that for free, which I was able to do with scholarships and writing essays and doing all sorts of other stuff and leveraging the FAFSA. And then it was interesting because it was like, okay, being brown and poor is actually paying off for me now, because I'm to the point where the government is like, okay, we care about you again. We care about you before you're born. Once you're born, like, like, come back to me when you're ready to make money. Oh, okay, cool. We can legally pay you and it won't be child labor. Now we care about you. Here's all this money. Go to school and dump more money back into the economy and pay your taxes. Thank you very much. But there's this dark period between the time you actually come into this world and the time you can make the world money, where they kind of don't care. So that was an interesting kind of twist of fate where, okay, maybe I went through that so that I can now take advantage of what America has to offer me in terms of the dream.
It seems like that experience kind of puts you like perpendicular to the culture or something. Like you're almost able to witness it in a different way where maybe like somebody that was conditioned like I am is like asleep in the culture from the beginning, but you have an outside perspective. I don't know, do you feel like you've been sort of radical in relation to culture, mainstream culture since then?
I always had to create my own worlds because it was, sometimes it was hard to make friends. And even when I even got into sort of the professional world, and here I was after 9/11, I look Arab American, I have an Arab name, and I'm working after 9/11 in the military industrial complex. And I'm going to all these bases, and I'm spending time in submarines with sailors. And that's just like the Tea Party starts to get going. And, it's like the frothing begins. There are very few times in my life where I ever felt the option to get lost in the culture. That wasn't an option for me. Like there's times I go to Thailand or I go to other places where everybody's brown. And that's the only time that I actually like, oh, okay, that's cool. But it just doesn't happen much in this country for me, especially not in the South. It almost wasn't a choice to be perpendicular, counterculture, to do any of that stuff. I'm trying to create a worldview and a reality where I can function in a way that aligns my mind and my heart and my spirit and respects my time and my talents and my abilities and allows me to love other people without trying to do that game of double dutch, because that is incredibly harmful. I found it incredibly harmful when I was a young professional.
Can you unpack that a little? What's the game of double dutch?
Oh, okay. So you go out in the street, if you're in the right neighborhood, and there'll be two little girls standing with two jump ropes, one in each hand, and they'll start doing circles. And then the other girls or boys will line up, and they'll, on the rhythm, and usually sometimes they're chanting or singing a song along with it, and then that person jumps in and keeps up sort of not hitting the rope for as long as they can, and then the next one steps in, and they kind of start freestyling and doing dancing and all these cool little steps, and that's called double dutch. And that's what it's like when you're outside of a particular dominant group and you have to work and figure out their rules. It's like stepping into a game of double dutch. It's not natural like walking. It's every single step. It's got to be right, or the rope's going to hit me. Oh, the rope hit me. Yeah. Everything's tangled around my ankle, and everybody's looking at me because I'm the weird one, because I couldn't keep up that thing because I'm not from that community. Like that level of code switching is not well enough appreciated, especially by folks in the dominant culture.
It sounds like it would take a tremendous amount of energy and bandwidth just on a regular basis.
Yes, and it sets up this internal proposition that what's happening in my external world is the right way. And the way that I'm doing it intuitively, or what's happening in my internal world, is the wrong way. Why doesn't my internal world match my external world? And then there's two extreme options that are presented. Immediately it's kind of like, what's wrong with me then? I've got to make my internal world match my external world, or I'm going to go crazy. So who do I emulate? I spend an awful lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to make the people around me comfortable so that I could look at them and tell where their nervous system was. And how can I get you from an 8 to a 6? Because as an 8, we're not going to be able to do business together. I need to do a 6 or below. And that's hard for me in my personality because I'm not great at chit-chat. And so, I had to develop that. I had to develop and understand what it was about me that made other people uncomfortable, and then try to mitigate for that. That was the option I took. The other extreme option is to blame the external world and become angry at it and become militant. And I think both need to exist. I think they're polarities. I fell closer to the polarity of internalizing it as something wrong with me and spending a lot of energy trying to be whatever it is that other people wanted me to be, for fear that if I wasn't, that I would not be able to provide for myself and others. almost a very existential life or death kind of thing. It's like, if I can't fit in this world, then I won't be able to do the things I need to continue to survive in this world. But the good news is that's all kind of balderdash, right? That's all false. Because there are languages, there are vibrations and ways of communicating that are supra-cultural.
Like music.
Like music, like love, like openness, like vulnerability, like touch, like food. These are things that need no translation. They are supra-conceptual. They are above concept. And so maybe it's the same technique, I don't know, but rather than thinking about sort of central nervous system, I just wait until people take a breath, or I can tell their habitual strain, muscular strain is starting to I see their skeleton just a little bit. And then I know that we're ready to actually not take ourselves so seriously in whatever it is that we're trying to do. And but the key is, the only thing I can really do is work on myself. Because if I'm taking myself seriously, I can't lay a trip on somebody else. You're taking it too seriously. And I can't fake that. And it's I can't be silly, because I do still need to feed myself. But the idea is that we all know this is all kind of silly. We're in all these different conspiracies, and we play all of these different roles.
When did that, I so appreciate that you can articulate that so beautifully, but I'm really curious, like, when that clicked for you, like what helped you see that?
It's a continual unfolding. I think I can kind of get there through even continuing my relationship with money. Because as I moved into entrepreneurship and starting small businesses, and I was able to have some successes and sell businesses and hobnob with billionaires. That's not a place I ever expected to be. And
were you trying to be there?
Sort of. Entrepreneurship for me was the most self-sufficient avenue that I could take, because I found very quickly that the military context is not where I play well. I need a little less structure for my talents to fully blossom. I have talents that have allowed me, for whatever reason, to get to the point where I had an excess of funds. I was living in abundance, but not buying things or changing my lifestyle, but just being in a place where I had an excess. And one, there's an emptiness to it. There's a feeling that I thought I would have when, as an entrepreneur, I scaled a business and then sold that business for a profit and got a big check. There was a feeling that I thought would be there. I thought people that I loved would look at me differently. I expected a lot of things, and none of it really came. The only thing that was there was, what's next? So I became what they call a serial entrepreneur, which is I just kept doing it, and failing, and some success, and some failure, and some success. But money in and of itself just kind of stopped being anything but a tool. Because I was able to, through my own life and then through witnessing other people who were, millionaires and billionaires, but still you could not have a 5-minute conversation with them without them talking about their wealth, what they're doing with their wealth, how they're planning for their wealth, the recession. They would talk about their kids for 2 minutes and talk about the oncoming recession for the next 18 minutes, if it's a 20-minute conversation. And they were incredibly unhappy. Some of them are all right. Some of them are on drugs and were doing good. But most of them were, I could see sort of this metastasizing of this emptiness I was feeling. That if I kept going, that emptiness was just going to grow and grow and grow instead of shrink. So yeah, I kind of realized, all right, this ain't it. And so that's kind of the deal with money. I think what you're asking about is something of a spiritual nature. But I think it's important to kind of understand the disillusionment too of like material wealth. I think one aspect of it too is, even to this day, I just kind of feel like someone made a mistake. When I'm in some of these meetings, like, I don't belong here. I'm not supposed to be here. I am nothing like these people, and they're nothing like me. And so in that way, it's like, I don't owe anything to anybody because it's not on anybody's back that I got here. It's not on my daddy's name, like a lot of them are there on their daddy's name. That's an incredible amount of pressure and suffering. And I have so much compassion for them. I'm not that. I'm here because I slipped in through the side door because I can do some things that other people can't do. And so if the money ain't it, but here I am, then what is it?
So it put you into like serious wandering in the desert.
Yeah, that was definitely part of it. I started to lean a lot more into, what can the impact of my work be? So I think it started at first from like an egotistical place. I was like, okay, well, I want to be a do-gooder. So how can I do that? So I need to build a brand, and I need to do this, and maybe this organization might be good for me to work with. Thinking of it as sort of like a marketing thing. And that became empty really quick too, because it led me into nonprofits and other things where they're counterintuitive to actually solving problems. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. So yeah, I kind of ended up with this set of skills, and the question was, how do I use this? And I know I don't want to be a bad person. So how can I be a good person and still use these things?
I feel really stuck in that part of my relationship with money. Like I still catch myself like really judging people that have money,
Well, Buddha came from money. Jesus hung out with some rich people too.
He did?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. They said of John the Baptist that he was an ascetic, but of Jesus that he came eating and drinking. And there was a time where he went into a house, and the house was of a rich person, and a woman anointed his feet with this really, really expensive oil. And the Pharisees were looking at us like, why? Why all this expense? Like, you could have sold that oil and gave the money to the poor. And Jesus blessed the woman. Mm-hmm. So, he was doing all right. Our perception of what Jesus was about is way off.
Yeah, can you talk about, go back to that place when that came into your life? Can we talk about
when did Jesus show up?
Yeah, just like that. Your the beginnings of that journey was coming up that way, like.
Yeah, we sure can. Well, I asked Jesus Christ to be my personal Lord and Savior at 8 years old. So kind of going back to my move down south with a single mom and 2 kids, my mom needed a support system. We were living in a trailer park, and there was, crime and drug use and people suffering in a way that wasn't the type of community that she could, feel comfortable with leaving her kids to. And so she leaned on the church. And so one day my brother and I walked up Highway 98 to this little church on a hill called Seabreeze Baptist Church, and went to Sunday school. And I was horrified. I was a little boy. I had no idea what was going on. I knew nothing of Jesus or white people, super Southern people. It was just a complete culture shock, new way of looking at the world. In some ways, a world of magic, and in some ways, this ancient world of like these laws that were given to us by God. And they drove me back home. They said, hey, where did you guys come from? And I was like, yeah, we live down the road. And so after church, they drove us back home. They met my mom, and we started going to that church. And my pastor became my legal guardian. And so I spent a good part of my youth in the home of my pastor and his wife and their kids. And they loved me as one of their kids. But that church that I went to was Missionary Baptist, was the denomination. And they are stricter than Southern Baptists, not as strict as some of the more primitive Baptists. That's actually a real term. That's not a pejorative. Like the primitive Baptists are like no instruments, no piano, everything a cappella.
Don't be human.
Yeah, very, very, even some are like, women cover their hair, and which again is not a pejorative, it's just what they do. It's how they choose to worship God. But we were not that stringent on things like musical instruments or any of that kind of stuff. But we felt the Southern Baptists were a little bit too swinging, particularly because they put all their money in one pot. And we thought that the Bible was pretty clear that every church has its own pot. And so we had associations, but they were loose associations of churches. We never commingled funds, because if you commingled funds, then Paul was very clear in his epistle to the Philippians, just like that's the kind of level of dissection of the Bible that was drilled into me from the time that I took that little walk with the stickers, hanging in my socks and the bottom of my little jeans, walking down the road in the gully, to the time that I was 28 years old. I can still quote the scriptures. It was just really deeply woven into my code of ethics. And a lot of times it was confusing. And a lot of times it was conflicting too, especially as things started to become, a little more political in the church. And I became old enough to actually recognize that, okay, there's a conflict between Israel and Palestine, and we're on Israel's side, right? And everybody said, absolutely right. We are always on Israel's side. Always. Okay, and here are the scriptures that say why we are always on. Okay, they're God's chosen people. I got it. Okay, but I'm Palestinian. So that's the conflict of identity that was introduced just through political worldview that was backed up by scripture. And so as someone who took scripture seriously and who understood the Christian narrative of the path of the Israelites to escaping Pharaoh to actually having a state, a proper state in 1948 as the fulfillment of several prophecies from the book of Daniel and Zechariah, and also these passages from St. John. All of these things were just, in line, because eventually Christ is going to come back and everyone's going to be judged and everything's going to be put in its proper place. And all of that's going to happen. So having an opinion against the state of Israel becomes anathema, because that state exists because of fulfilled biblical prophecy, because God said it would happen and it happened, which means everything else is also going to happen. So get yourself straight.
It's impossible.
It's all impossible, and it's all political. And that's what is really never fully acknowledged in any church that I've ever been in, where they take this very seriously, is the acknowledgement of the political nature of the texts that they are ascribing to God. That man has dabbled and intruded himself into the picture quite dramatically. And it wasn't in 1611 when King James said, "This is it," that it became it. Mm-hmm. It was it when it left the mouth of Jesus. That's when it became it. And it became all sorts of other things after that.
So seeing the political application in action revealed that to you, that bastardization? It
started the questioning in a really painful way, because it created this schism inside of me where I felt like I was almost half evil, half against God.
What did being Palestinian mean to you at that point, with your dad not an active part of your life?
It was something I knew from the news was related to violence and terrorism. So it was something I didn't understand. I never had the ability to actually have a good, loving context of that culture through a family setting. So I knew from the news, and I knew from the people around me and the people raising me, who were all self-professed Zionists, who took a very clear stance on the wars that happened after this, 1948, and just kind of, this is just the way that it is, because this is the way that God is doing it. And there's lots of justification that can be made for that from the Bible.
What happened when you started to feel that split of you contain something inherently evil? Did that push? I imagine it's impossible to have vulnerability really with a structure that's telling you that. So did you push it away?
Yes, I tried to override it with being a good Christian. Like I had to really prove it, you know? I was like, I really love you, God. Like I really so I worked at a seminary, taught Sunday school, and then eventually I became a youth pastor, and then eventually the pastor of our church would let me give sermons on Sunday nights if he wasn't in town. And so I was not ordained, but everybody knew it was just a matter of time before I'd get the call and I'd be ordained and become a missionary or become this great preacher for the Lord. And so I was in it, and I was really, really, really trying to do it right. But I kept seeing how things really are. And there are like a great many saints where you read about their struggle between their belief system and what they're actually seeing in the world. I think Buddha, that's what started where he's at. But if you read like St. Thomas Aquinas and other people who were understanding their faith but not actually seeing it manifest in the world, you can blame it on the devil. But if God made everything, at some point, you've got to figure out what kind of God allows for the kind of suffering that we see in the world. If you truly see the suffering and you acknowledge it, then that has to be the next question. What kind of world do we live in that allows this kind of suffering, where there is this kind of suffering? What is the nature of suffering? Those things start to become really important. And so as I started to go to college and get really interested in philosophy and world religions and getting that information in not a perfect way, but in a far less biased and at least a more objective way than what I was learning about Buddhism or Taoism or Catholicism or all of these other isms that aren't our isms. And the isms that aren't our isms are wrong, and they're bad these ways, and there's such hyperbole and nonsense and outright lies about what I was taught in my church.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, I think a simple one is because I've been a practicing Buddhist now for almost 13 years, and I'm familiar with that sort of world and their belief systems. It's hard for me to talk about it because they're not beliefs. And that's the thing. It's like everything is also looked at as a counter religion. And so they have to say, well, here's what Buddhists believe. And one of the main things is, they worship idols. And that is about the worst thing that you can do. Because when they asked Jesus, what are the great commandments? He said, love God and love your neighbor. Those two go together. They're inseparable. You can't do one without the other, by the way. So you asked me what the great commandment is. I gave you two because it's yin and yang. It's because it's duality. And you can't love God if you don't love the person next to you, because the person next to you is God. Get it? You don't? Okay, we'll try it again tomorrow. That's what he was saying. But they take that as there is a God. Like there is a pharaoh. There is a monarch who is just as jealous as we are, and just as irrational as we are, and vengeful. And, did I mention jealous? And he, capital H, will not abide you worshiping any other God. Worship no other God before me, he said. And
So petty.
well, he's the God.
Right.
Right? And you think he'd be pretty secure in that. But apparently he needs us to remind him over and over again. And often, great men with great power are very insecure, is what I found. So maybe this is like the ultimate. Is if that's your picture of God, and you have all of these stories of him exterminating people and having armies exterminate people, and not only that, he can't only get you here, he can get you after. So not only that, putting your soul in eternal torment forever and ever and ever. No hope for escape, not even death. That one door out is now closed. You're just going to suffer and burn. And I did this to you because you didn't love me. You don't know my love languages. You didn't love me exactly how I told you to love me. And so I'm going to throw you in the lake of fire forever and ever. Good luck. And I'm just going to sit here with my angelic host and all the people who do know how to love me, and it's all going to be great for eternity. If that's your concept of God, then everything else, it becomes super existentially important that other people don't believe in any other God. Because don't they know what's going to happen to them? And idolatry is just like, so the fact that there are statues of Buddha in Buddhist homes, and that some light incense or some do puja, where they give little bits of food, is seen as, oh, ooga booga, the idol worshiper, and, because it's also taught behind every idol is a devil, is a demon behind every idol. And the early church did not let, there's actually a controversy in which they were discussing, should we eat food offered to idols? Because we're going and we're trying to share the gospel with all of these heathens. And we come into their homes and they're nice to us and they're feeding us these amazing meals. But I'm seeing them take that ingredient that was in front of that idol and now they're putting it into my bread. Like, should I eat that?
Is this idol bread?
Yeah. Is it tainted in some way? And so a lot of the original apostles who were culturally and religiously Jewish were still very protective of kosher diet and the purity of sort of this lineage from Christ that they saw, where they're making Gentiles get circumcised if they weren't circumcised in order to be part of the church. Like pretty traumatic stuff. But the apostles were like, well, we absolutely should not be doing that. And but it turns out God said it's okay and sent some visions to Peter. So Peter had a psychedelic trip on a mountain. And in that trip, God said, hey, I'm going to lay out this beautiful banquet before you. There's ham hocks and there's a chop right there. If you want some bacon, you have some bacon and a little bit of quinoa. Falafel, I actually cooked the falafel in bacon grease. Enjoy, Peter. And Peter was like, Lord, I can't eat this stuff. I'm intermittent fasting right now. And he said, Peter, don't call cursed what I have blessed. Oof. And that goes for people too. That the whole point of Jesus appearing at the time at which he appeared to the people of Judea was because they were an imprisoned people twice over. They were being occupied by the Roman Empire and overtaxed, and they could not move freely in their own land, which is what we would consider a war crime if you can't have free passage to your land.
That sounds familiar.
So if that's happening anywhere in the world, that's illegal under international law. And that's what was happening to the Jewish people at that time. But on top of that, they were also imprisoned by the Pharisaical laws of the church, the synagogue, the temple, the religious complex that was cooperating in a buddy-buddy agreement manner with the Roman Empire, with Pontius Pilate, in a way to keep the people subservient. So it was a way for the religious class to elevate themselves above the common class and protect themselves, while also creating a situation where they could monetize their religiosity and their influence, their political influence, through additional religiosity. And so by the time that Jesus got there, you were screwed. You weren't a free person in terms of citizenry. You were captive. And there was nothing you could possibly do to give God enough to clear your plate for heaven. And so that's why Jesus got so mad when he went to the temple and he saw people selling all of these wares and taking advantage of people and knowing that people were coming there with the last little bit that they had. But because they had this thought, or is this time of year, they had to get a dove. And so they got a dove to do the sacrifice. And Jesus walked into this place that was supposed to be a place to celebrate God. And he saw this economy built on top of people's yearning to get to God. And that's why he lost it. And that's why he flipped all the tables over, because it's like, this is supposed to be our way of remembering who we are, who the father is, who the mother is. And you've turned it into a den of iniquity. You've turned it into this palace of desire. And it goes all the way to the top. That's why the only people that Jesus ever spoke harshly to wasn't the prostitutes. It wasn't the lepers. It wasn't the poor people. It wasn't the upper middle class Jewish family, the man who knew that he was overtaxing the people, but worked as part of the Roman government as a Jew to collect those. They were considered the lowest of the low, a complete class traitor. And he hung out with them, and he never talked badly about them. The only people he ever talked badly to their faces, were the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were the people who were monetizing the yearning for God and putting all of these extra laws and rules on people and trying to catch him in some sort of blasphemous situation so that they could nail him up to a tree. That was always their end game, because he was a complete nuisance. He had a different state of consciousness, and that state of consciousness was contagious. And that is the biggest threat to any sort of complex, is when you're able to bring a different state of consciousness to a situation and leave space for people to say, oh, yeah, let me meet you there for a little bit. Let me meet you there. This feels really free. Maybe all these laws don't make sense. Maybe the way that we built the world doesn't make sense. And maybe there's a freedom that can go beyond my current situation. So maybe, yeah, I've got a Roman centurion, patrolling my neighborhood, but I can still be free because he can't ever take away who I really am. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, then maybe I don't need to make all those sacrifices, right? And then, it all falls apart. Yeah. The whole thing unravels. It's subversive. And so they did their best from the time that, Jesus was crucified, and the apostles, many of them were martyred. But at that time, Paul had taken, as a Roman citizen, the teachings to Rome and worked with the Roman government to create a state-sponsored religion, Christianity.
Was it pretty much doomed from there?
It spread throughout the world from there. And a key part of that was the scrubbing of the message of Christ. So we had, many councils of Trent and Constantinople and multiple somewhat democratic but politically motivated edits of the message of Christ. And not just that, but sort of the narrative that runs from the Torah, from the beginning of time, from Genesis, through to the final revelation to St. John, where Jesus has kind of a pretty important part in the middle. But it's buttressed by old antiquity, patriarchal antiquity, and a worldview that it's all going to shit, and that God's going to come back, and it's going to be bad, and there's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and you better get straight, because he exists, and he's coming, and he's pissed about what happened to Jesus, let me tell you, and he's just waiting, So, you start with tisk tisk, you ate that apple, to, yeah, remember eating that apple? This is what's going to happen because he ate the apple. And in the middle, just this little sea of hope from this guy that showed up and was here for 33 years on the planet and really only had a ministry for 3 of those years. And most of the time of his life, he was a refugee. And he said, hey, it's not all that serious, actually. Like, you don't need anything. Like, you've got it. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It's not tomorrow. It's not after you die. It's right here. And all you have to do is just become a kid again. Yeah, make your mind like a child. Forget everything you learned. And let's play. Mm-hmm. And I'll show you how things are. And don't worry about tomorrow. Like, you'll be good. Like, we're all going to be good. It's okay. Trust me, I've seen it. I know it. I am it. Mm-hmm. And you can be it too. And it's the you can be it too that has been beaten down in the church. And that's the real gospel. The gospel isn't that Christ was this one-off God made man. The gospel is that that's what we all are, and that he didn't have this unfair advantage. Because in the church that I grew up, they put you in this impossible position where they say, Jesus Christ is your example, but he was God, and you're not God. He was at least God's son. And he could do all these miracles, and he knew he was going to be resurrected 3 days later, but still take up your cross and follow him. And you'll never actually be as perfect as him, because he was perfect and he never sinned. And also he was God and you're not. You got it? So have fun with life. Have fun decoupling yourself from the guilt of being put up against an unfair standard of excellence.
And what's politically expedient about keeping people in that state of consciousness?
It's slavery. And we come right back around with the mega churches that have the Starbucks in the lobby and Chick-fil-A in the lobby and the big screen, so you don't have to go home and catch the game. You can actually just, right after the sermon.
So did that eventually become untenable for you to be in any kind of leadership position in the church once you realized the game?
Yeah, it's hard after you realize that you've really been lied to. Because then it's like, why did you lie? So where was the threat? I guess I have to say Buddhists decisively do not worship idols. And they actually don't really have any beliefs other than we are able to, with all of our faculties, experience reality as it really is. That's literally it.
Which is being God, I guess.
Once you actually really see it all, yeah, because there's nothing separating any of us. But yeah, that was really the sort of beginning of the end. I also had other experiences where I met for the first time people living different lifestyles. I met homosexuals, which I was, again, told were a certain type of person. And I realized they're beautiful people, just like me. And there's no difference. And it's a stupid distinction. And it's none of my business. But I saw Christ in them. I saw God in them. And all of these things, I'm talking like early 20s, coming from a small town in a very encapsulated religion system. These were eye openers. And I can't be ashamed of that, because those were just my first exposures to these kinds of people. I'd say I didn't wake up, or I didn't get born woke, you know what I mean? I had to actually realize, like, oh shit, like my whole worldview on this whole thing needs to be re-examined. And I think just because of who I am, and also the example of my mom to always question things and to believe my own and trust my own senses, it brought me back to the church with a lot of questions. And I couldn't ask them because I already knew what the answers would be, because I was in my 20s and I had been doing this since I was like 5. So I already knew the answers that they would give me, but they weren't satisfactory to me. I wasn't going to love the sinner and hate the sin. I'm not going to hate that you love someone just because they have the same genitalia as you do. Is that what I'm supposed to hate? Like, what is it I'm supposed to hate? Like, what is the evil that's going on here? So that sort of bifurcation of people and their deeds, or people and who they are, was just not, like, I couldn't make it happen in my brain. And so I had gotten really into philosophy, and one of the things that interested me was the idea of the Jeffersonian Bible, which only uses the words of Christ. And that's it. You don't get additional context from the peanut gallery backwards or forwards. This is it. It's what he said. And I decided to start only teaching from that. So my Sunday school lessons and any sermons, everything would only come from the words of Jesus, because we're Christians after all. And that was a radical act. And I realized how much preachers would build their case, because it is like listening sometimes to a prosecution build their case. And they might start with Jesus or sprinkle in a little Jesus, but they would greatly support their cases from the teachings of Paul. or some sort of prophecy from the Old Testament. And I would rarely hear a sermon that would just take a verse. Like, you could spend a year with one verse of the teachings of Christ. I promise you, if you really care about it and you really want to understand, you could take one thing that he said and spend an entire year on it and reach enlightenment. I'm certain of it.
Can you give us a little Jesus, Cohen?
Jesus, well, just the Beatitudes. Just reading, those are all Cohen's. Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. Just take one of those, just one of the Beatitudes, and just work with it. Just put it in your heart and think about it. And what does that mean? And what is my relationship to wealth or money? What's my relationship to the poor? Why will the poor inherit the earth? What does that mean? What does it mean to be meek? I mean, I've heard whole sermons on the entire Beatitudes, like all of them. And I look back on that now, and it's just like, it almost feels like fast food religion. But what I found was, without a lot of the built-in conceptual structures that had been built over years and years and years of repetition, where people would know, okay, you're talking about this, but didn't Paul say this in Ephesians? And if you turn to Ephesians, I knew it, because you know what the thought process, you know what, da, 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 da. Like, we go to our Lord Jesus, if we can, we go to God the Father. And that's the best. If we can go find something in Isaiah or something way back when, like God the Father said, okay, that's the Father. If you can't get the Father, you get the Son. We got the Son. Okay, cool. Now, if you can get the Son and you can get Paul, now you're in business. And then if there's something you can do to remind people that it's all going to blow up at the end, that's even better. And that's what it all is. But without that support, just the teachings of Christ, it hurts. Because it forces introspection. Because the people standing, and praying out loud and waving their hands, they weren't doing it. They weren't the ones. It was the outcast woman, divorced woman at the well. She was the one.
Can you tell that story about what happened when you started trying to preach that?
Yeah, so that was really interesting. So really sort of the end of the end was, in Pensacola, we have in the summer what was actually, I think, one of the most and longest enduring pride parades. And they would come, since I was a little boy, like before it became a big thing. And that was always a time in the church that was, people were nervous. They didn't want to go to the beach. They would always start having sermons around, that particular area of sin that they felt was penetrating the community, if I may use that turn of phrase. And it scared the hell out of them. Because I don't know if they thought that they were like army recruiters, like they were knocking on little boys' doors, like, hey, you want to be gay today? But that's kind of like how they, like, don't go, nobody goes to the beach. We're going to pray. We might even have a revival. So a lot of the revival stuff that started happening around that was like a direct push against what they felt was kind of this encroaching gay community. So I believe it was around that time, and I had become really, really dear friends with one of my colleagues named Lynn, who was just a beautiful human being, and she had been married to her wife for many, many years, and it was just a really gorgeous, affirming relationship for me to witness, and I learned a lot from them. So there's that, and there was kind of the increasing fervor as we got closer to the summer, as those things were rolling around, and so I decided to say, all right, well, what does Jesus have to say about this kind of thing? And, not much. But what he did have to talk about was how we treat those that we feel are outcast from our sort of mainstream culture. And he did that not just through how and what he preached, but how he lived his life and who he hung out with. So stories like the Good Samaritan, like his interaction with the woman at the well, who was kind of had a scarlet letter and was of ill repute, and how he was compassionate towards her, didn't browbeat her or judge her. The numerous times that he was around prostitutes where groups of men were coming to kill the prostitute by throwing giant stones and smashing their skulls open. They said they came to stone her, that's all it says. But it was a gruesome, barbaric, torturous practice. And you would die very, very slowly and in a lot of pain. And they would do this with women they felt had more than one sexual partner. And he saved many lives directly by just pointing that rage back to them and asking them, you can go ahead and stone this woman, and the one who throws the first stone is the one who's done nothing wrong. Who's going to throw it? Who's the one among you who's perfect? No one? Okay. And he had a little bit of judo about him, or aikido, but that was his message. Kind of like Gandhi when someone was, a reporter was chasing down Gandhi and he was going off on a train. He said, "Gandhi, please give us a message to get back to my people." And Gandhi wrote on a piece of cardboard, "My life is my message," and handed it back. That's all Jesus was doing too. And so I just took those examples and said, how should we treat one another? Like, these weren't complex things. Well, if we use the example of Christ, here's how he treated this class of person, this class of person, and this class of person. And here's how this class of person was actually viewed in that culture. And almost every time that I would describe the outcast, it would be what we were doing to people of color or what we were doing to our gay community. All of these judgmental views, these pious, self-righteous views that separated us from those communities versus the love that Jesus showed that created connection. And a lot of those people ended up hanging out with Jesus and became his crew, because they're like, "I like that you love me even though other people." And how many are, you got like 7,500 people? Like, yeah, I feel safe. Yeah, let's do that. There's nothing for me here. And then by doing that, they took themselves out of a situation where if they had addictive behavior or whatever it was that was putting them in that situation where they kept perpetuating their own suffering, they were taken out of that concept and put into a communal group that all were thinking the same things and loved themselves the same way, and someone who was their mouth, who was reminding them all the time. And then they were going out and feeding poor people and tending to the sick. And yeah, so those people stopped their bad behaviors, not because I'm going to be righteous or God's going to save me, because I found something better, because I found something more fulfilling. And that something fulfilling was just unconditional love. That's all it is. And so really the one that got me kicked out was taking those stories and just connecting the dots for them. I asked them, so taking the spirit and the mind of Christ that we just read about, let's all imagine that the doors at the back of the church open and a black family walks through the door. How do you treat them? Will you invite them to sit next to you? Will you have them come over and watch the game or have some lunch? Or will you go over there and see how, where they're living, and what will you do? And we had actually in that church had some racial tension with black families before. And as I sort of scanned their faces, I could tell they were a little uncomfortable, but also like a little sheepish, it's just like, yeah, he's really right. He's got me dead to rights here, and so my next example was, okay, let's reset, and let's say the door's open and it's a tall, good-looking black man, and he's holding the hand of a white girl, and they just got married. They're in their 20s. Do you invite them to sit next to you? Do you invite them over to... And that's when I started to see the physical fidgeting, mainly because one of the anonymous issues that were being raised was a family that tried to join our church that had a 14-year-old black boy. And they did not want their teenage girls to be interested in the black boy. And that was the thing that made it hard for them to accept that family.
That was addressed overtly.
No, this was like nobody knew. It was just somebody pulls the preacher aside privately and said, like, there's a concern in the church, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we had to discuss it, but it wasn't discussed explicitly. So that was intentional because these were real world things that we were dealing with that completely undermined what we said that we believed and who we worshiped, who we said we worshiped. Like, prostrate on the ground, face down, the angelic host and all that jazz. Like, we're talking about world-class worship here. And it's not world-class worship if you're doing the exact opposite of what he showed you should do. And so the last one was, what if those doors open and two men walk in holding hands and they're in love? How do you treat them? And I said, just, take the spirit and the heart of Christ with you and examine yourself. And, let's close in prayer. And so after church that day, the pastor pulled me aside and he said, I know that you really, really know the Word of God. And you are so strong in your faith, but you really need to be careful about what you teach because other people are not so strong in their faith. And you might lead them towards thinking, I'm not saying you think this, but thinking that lifestyle is okay. And we don't want to open that, even the possibility of thinking that lifestyle might be okay. And I reminded him that these are just the words of Christ. And I asked him, was there anything that I said that was a departure or too much of a transliteration of what he said that doesn't fall in line with our doctrinal point of view as missionary Baptists? And he had known me since I was little, and he was there leading the seminaries that I was working at during the summers. And the answer was no. But it's just these are sensitive things, Which then kind of raises the question, I was like, what are we doing then? Why are we going to church? There's a rule book that we have to follow, and I wonder what those rules are made for. It's not to make us get to God. Is it for us to be comfortable? Maybe. So that and some other kind of additional racial things got me to where I went through a period of really intense anger, feelings of abandonment or rejection. I was never angry with God or Jesus or any of that, but I was angry at the complex, the church. And that took me a while to really get over. But I think when that all died down, there was a longing still that was really genuine to have a spiritual connection. I felt in whatever place that I was when I was trying to be the best Christian that I could be, I felt that connection to a higher part of myself. And I knew that there was something there in the message of Christ. I knew it. And I tried every which way to try to calibrate that and use the existing apparatus to make it work. And there's certainly cool, progressive, Christian churches that are super hip and cool and all that kind of stuff, and make you feel okay about being a Christian. It's not your daddy's Christianity type thing. But in the end, there was just this I had a mystical experience. So when people say that I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I asked Christ and Jesus into my heart, that is something that in my spiritual tradition, Baptist, is required for you to get to heaven. And it's also what they think Jesus meant when he said you must be born again. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, that which is born of the spirit is spirit. Lest ye be born again, ye shall not enter the kingdom of God. Okay, well, that obviously means that you need to have some sort of mystical experience. Well, we're going to help you out and prescribe to you what it is that you need to do to have that experience, and right about the time of age that you should be having it. And we're just going to make it super easy. So, If you like really get it, you could have a mystical experience, 6 or 7 years old. If you're, if it's taking you a little bit of time, like 11, 12, if you're getting into your teenage years and you haven't had that mystical experience, something might be wrong with you, and you're obviously fighting it, and you just need to stop fighting it and just have this personal mystical experience. You're supposed to have this spontaneous thing on demand is what you're supposed to do. We do that to children all the time. You have to love me, but only if you mean it. Like that can't do anything but screw you up. Saying, you got to beat your heart right now. No, I don't. It's just going to happen. Trust me. I trust it. But no, like, you have this window where it's like kind of accepted or kosher for you to have this mystical experience. And when you feel that nagging in your heart, that's God, not us, not peer pressure. That's God telling you that it's time to have that mystical experience. It's not us, trust me. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is God talking to you. That's the Holy Spirit knocking at the door of your heart, and you just gotta let it in. So there's a tremendous amount of expectation and pressure around that experience. And when you're ready to have that experience, normally what happens is at the end of a church service, they'll have an invocation or an altar call. And the preacher will say, if you're feeling in your heart that you have something to say to God, or if you want to talk to me about anything, I'll be here. And brothers and sisters, if God is knocking at your heart to let him in today, just let him in. And there's soft piano music playing, and there's these special songs that are just for that period of the service.
So you can be like, I think I am going to have a spiritual awakening today.
Yeah. I was 8 years old and had been just asking around casually about this mystical experience I keep hearing about. And so everybody was like, he's close, So there is this feeling of just like, everyone is expecting this at any time. And so, near my God to these playing in the background is like, and sometimes he'll, like the preacher will know, so he'll just look right at you and say, if you feel God knocking at your heart, he wants to come in. He wants to come into your heart. He wants to come into your heart.
Does that kind of set you up with imposter syndrome after that, though?
I have a very strong feeling and belief that this is an individual experience. And so I can't speak for anybody else, but I can tell you at 8 years old, walking down the aisle and getting on my little knees and asking God for forgiveness for all the sins that I had accumulated over my little 8-year life. And I can tell you that I had a mystical experience. And I can still feel it. And I will always remember it. And whether that was just the sheer exhale of, this is a rite of passage that maybe Jewish kids feel the same thing after their bar mitzvah or their bat mitzvah. They might be like, okay, And it feels like a mystical experience because it's such a change of consciousness from a guilt-ridden consciousness to a now you're accepted in our community consciousness. And that's the feeling that they say, now Jesus is in your heart. It's a ritual. It's a rite of passage. And if you have a personal experience with God in that moment, that is an individual experience that just happened to happen. So maybe your heart opened at that time, for you really to connect and realize, whoa, I'm bigger than all of this. Or I am love, or any of those type of things. But I felt lighter than air. I knew that I had a connection, and that's what I felt decoupled from, and what hurt me the most when I left the church under those circumstances was something for me that was real, that I buried under anger for a long time, and then once the anger ran off, lo and behold, it was still there, that this isn't all it. So I ended up wandering into a Shambhala meditation center one day when I moved to Portland. Well, I had actually done a bike tour of all of the Buddhist temples in Portland, which was amazing. What's going on here? Like, what's the scene? Like, all these Buddhists, all these monks, they seem like they're very at peace and happy, and they're smiling and laughing, and there's got to be something there. And yeah, so I wandered into a Shambhala meditation center, just like started looking through their literature, and there's somebody there, and we kind of talked for a little while, and they're like, yeah, here's our schedule. We meditate on these days. And I said, well, what is meditation? And they kind of explained it to me, and so I said, yeah, maybe I'll come back. So I think I came back the following Saturday and learned from just about the most accessible and easy on-ramp that you can have into a meditation practice. Very westernized, like very easy to understand English, and I just really dug it. I was very caught up in my intellect and my ego, and also still hurting from my prior spiritual experience. So the idea, one, that, the mind, the final frontier. It's like, yeah, hell yeah, the mind. I can dig that. But then also, there's no gods. I mean, there are gods, but you can go to Hinduism if you want all that stuff. So just ignore. They're not a prerequisite to anything, and you can figure it out yourself. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's the only way to figure it out. So you can't know. If you know, it's not it. But you can be it. And once you are being it, then you get it.
I feel like once you experience a container that's telling you, like, a teacher that's turning you back to yourself, any other voice of authority that's not doing that is just, you inherently can like zoom out and see the game that's being played,
Yeah, and that's why it was so enticing for me to like have the guy, like, Buddha. Like, okay, this guy's the authority in this particular tradition, so, what's the Buddha got to say? And the Buddha is saying, look, don't trust teachers. Don't trust texts. Don't trust songs or chants.
Don't trust me.
Yeah, don't trust me. Like, if anything I'm telling you, if you can't go out and experience it, then don't follow me. But when I tell you that the world is suffering, if you can go and prove me wrong, please do it. Mm-hmm. But go out and look. And like, you can just go look in the mirror. The world is suffering. The world is decaying. The world is impermanent. That is a fact. Okay, maybe a little bit depressing to start off with, but all right, this seems legit. What else you got? And in a way, kind of to a Western hopeful mentality, or maybe like Americans have a hope that people in other parts of the world find really sometimes inspiring and a lot of times very naive. So an American bouncing around, the UK, as I did for a while, they pretty quickly get tired of you because they think you're an idiot, because can't you see that the world is completely dreary? But yeah, the idea that I did not need an intercedent. Mm-hmm. And that's what I had always been taught. They teach you that Jesus is sitting at the right throne of the Father, and he is your conduit to that. I mean, it says right here, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. He said that. So that obviously means that when you pray, you've got to pray to Jesus, and then Jesus will, at central command, route your message appropriately. Jesus has the headphones on, and he's plugging away like the different cables, making sure that everybody's message gets to God if they deserve to get to God. If you don't pray in the name of Jesus, it doesn't get to God. So him being the intercedent for a prayer to God is very central to a lot of the things that we do in Christianity, from how we pray to how we think about how we connect with God. But the mystical experience that Jesus had, where he said, I am God, supersedes that political model and is incredibly threatening to the system. And so there is a lot of defense mechanisms to keep people from getting there. And if you do get there, then you've committed the ultimate blasphemy. Like, you can't say that. There's only Jesus could do that. And he's the only one, but nobody else after that, which interestingly enough made his entire message irrelevant. So to go from that to someone telling me, just go experience it. Here's what I'm going to tell you. 4 things. Everything's suffering. The world's burning. Okay, like that sucks, but let's face it. That's what's happening. Everything's decaying. There's a reason for that, though, because even though everything is decaying, you don't have to suffer. You only suffer to the things that you cling to. So that means that there's a way out. If you can just let things go and be in the moment, then you cannot suffer, regardless of what's happening in your life, whether you are in a period of gain or loss, or praise or blame, or pain or pleasure, that there's an equanimity if you just ride it out. Don't hang on to anything. As soon as you hang on to it, and you start suffering, and if you're suffering, you can be sure you're hanging on to it. Need help? Because there's 8 things you can do called the Eightfold Noble Path that help you right yourself. And that's, having a good understanding of how the world works, speaking gently, not killing things, right? Just basic things that make it hard to meditate. If I'm spend the day murdering, it's going to be hard for me when I sit to actually get to a calm place of mind. So it's just, it's practical advice so that you can have a mind that is clear enough to see the world as it is. And then once you see the world as it is, then now you are experiencing the moment. And when you experience the moment, you're God. Because that is all that God is. It's all God can ever be, is the moment. Because that's all anything can ever be, is the moment. And we're all just smashed into it. Everything else is a hallucination of the mind. It's either a memory or it's a fantasy. And so that kind of message was like, okay. So nobody can really tell me how it's done, but they can give me some pointers. It's up to you to experience it. If you want to apply these disciplines, then you have them available to you. If you'd like to meditate, here's how to do that. And then at that point, kind of any religion becomes a different avenue to the same place, which is the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth.
You said earlier that some of the Christian saints were coming to that same struggle of like what kind of God, basically, if there is suffering. You just offered like Buddha's answer to that. Like what do the saints come to in the Catholic container or the Christian container?
Well, what they've done is they've split God in 2, and they have God the benevolent Father, who is still jealous and vengeful and all those things, but in the spirit of this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. Like the loving but chaste kind of, Heavenly Father. And then this free swinging cat named Satan, Lucifer, who's responsible for all the things that take you away from God. And so that's the idea of duality, and it's pretty dramatic. And that's the tradition in Christianity. And so there's also a pretty prevalent sort of first state understanding that man is evil, which is always a topic for debate in philosophy, if people like that sort of thing. Are we inherently good or, we are. We just are. We're all of it. But there is this presupposition that, you're born bad. And you're born bad because, because Adam and Eve did the thing. And now everybody else is cursed for eternity because that's how it works. So coming from that place, the suffering and all the bad and stuff kind of takes on a karmic-like quality. But in terms of how karma is understood by the general public in popular culture, not what karma really is, which is this sort of like cosmic keeping of the score. And in Christianity, the way you get out of that game is you accept Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ went to the cross, and in his suffering on the cross, in that act of sacrifice, he became the Lamb of God. So the picture is to sacrificing the lamb at the altar that has been going on for 5,000 years in the Jewish tradition. This is the lamb. All of that other stuff that you were doing with those lambs were pictures of this. This is fulfilled prophecy. And through that act, all of your sins are wiped clean. Only if you say this specific prayer and believe what I tell you to believe. Then you get to have that mystical experience. But what that mystical experience really means is you just booked your Priceline flight to heaven. That's done. And some some sects of Christianity believe you can lose that. But the one that I grew up in believed that, nope, once you're in, you're in. Once you're in, you're in. Like, that's a big win. And so at that point, everything evil becomes temptation or something to save. And everyone experiencing evil and suffering in their life is essentially, the way Jesus put it, reaping as they sow, which is just kind of like a basic karmic thing that can be really taken advantage of and can be used as an excuse for a lot of things. You notice that there's not a lot of personal responsibility in any of that. It's a cosmic game that's being played outside, and we're just these little beings here at God's pleasure on sufferance, and we can be gone at any time. And this is all we've got. You just get one go around. And if you don't do all the things right, if you don't guess right, then to hell with you, baby.
It makes me kind of really existential about the idea of humans trying to pass on wisdom from generation to generation, because it seems like humans inherently play in this metaphorical realm of storytelling and understanding who we are through that process. But the minute something becomes language, it's like ripe for manipulation. And there's something so appealing about Buddhist premises, not that there aren't Buddhist texts, but just that it's passed down in like this living experiential way that's new in each new generation, in each new moment. It's like harder to corrupt, it seems like.
Yes. And it's interesting to think in a very similar way how Buddhism, through the Reformation teachings of Buddha, came out of Hinduism as a quasi-reform movement. And you have Hinduism, which is very dramatic, romantic view, lots of gods, lots of forces outside of oneself, and this idea of reincarnation, which makes things all a little less serious, and the seeking of pleasure as a basic kind of thing. So the teachings of Buddha in some way are a backlash against that worldview to move things back into the middle. But every spiritual tradition has a mystical thread that often they really, really try to pull from the fabric. And that's the magic thread that I've been trying to chase through what I now kind of recognize as a prime mystical experience in my youth, honoring that and seeing what methods are available for me to maintain that connection, grow that connection, strengthen that connection, and definitely never lose it again. I think it can be done through a Christian tradition or any tradition, really. I think it can, if you're in the right place, you can watch a leaf falling to the ground and it can happen. It's just a state of consciousness. It's a connection. Mysticism is just a personal experience of God. And that's been the scary thing. It's like we all know we have this power. We forgot we had it. And then there's an really active conspiracy to make sure we don't remember. But a few people around every generation who are just like, remember, 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 remember. And then the people, Jesus said, he who hath an ear, let him hear. And if you're not ready to hear it, you're not ready to hear it. The Bhagavad Gita says it's an immoral act to try to treat someone who's not ready to receive. Cast not your pearls before the swine. I could go on, but the thing is, someone has to be ready.
Right.
You can't force. And what you were saying is that it's an ineffable connection. It's, again, like supra-conceptual. And the moment it becomes a thought, it becomes a concept. And the moment it becomes a word, it becomes encapsulation of phonetics, representing a concept that represents something super conceptual. So you're already 3 degrees away from what that thing already is.
Yeah.
And good luck using the English language to try to describe what it means to be everything. You can't. And so at a certain point, you just stop talking and just start being. And that's when everyone likes you a lot more than when you're talking about it.
Well, speaking of which, thank you for talking about it, because you do it so beautifully. I'd love to ask you about psychedelics if you have the energy for it, but I have to pee, and I just wanted to check in and see how everybody's doing.
yeah, that's just another method.
Ooh. Okay.
Have I said anything at all? I'm just trying to be empty and let it just...
It's coming.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, the way things make sense in my brain, if I can get them to come out right, is different than the way things make sense in other people's brains. And just that, whatever that difference is, just seems to make people say like, oh, okay. It's like the parable of the blind men and the elephant. And they all argue instead of actually coming together. It's like, maybe I was touching a different part of the elephant. It's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Like just that little shift of perspective would have helped them actually get it. But we all, like, it's just this amazing, intricate dance of the universe that we all just come into each other's orbits at different times. And the people, even the people who cut you off in the road, or that police officer on the side of the road, you've got, like, a choose your own adventure right in front of you. Like, do I get uptight because of that cop? Do I get angry? Do I say, fuck you, cop? Or do you say, I love you? I hope you have a really good night. I hope you're safe. I hope you get home safe. And please don't follow me. And just to do it from purely selfish reasons, the choice is obvious. Because how I feel when I get uptight, how I feel when I get angry, how I feel when I don't like that feeling. I carry it with me. It's tension in my body. It's like, that can upset my stomach. It like starts to dominate my thoughts versus like feeling love. And it's really easy.
I feel like that's actually a good segue to psychedelics, because I think that's something that psychedelics helped me learn in a really visceral way. Was like, my inner experience is my entire experience of the universe. I'm taking everything in through the filter that is my consciousness and my body. And I think it just woke me up to being so much more aware of the fact that I'm designing my experience of the world all the time, and like wanting to fill it with good stuff. Mm-hmm. Would you tell me a little bit about your recent psychedelic adventures?
Yeah. Where I am now is just kind of understanding that the Buddhist parable of the raft is apt for all of the things that are available to us in our spiritual journey. And that parable goes like, if you're walking down one side of the river to get to a place and you realize, oh, I can't go any further on this side, I have to cross over to continue. And you make yourself a raft. And you get on that raft, you get to the other side. And the question from Buddha is it wise then to pick up that raft and carry it with you away from the river? And, you can answer that for yourself. But the idea is that even the teachings of Buddha are just a vehicle to get us to the other shore of awakening. And I see all religions in that way as a raft, as a method for us to explore how we can satisfy this yearning that we have to get back to the mother. And we all have it. And the mystical experience is a small taste, whatever we can kind of experience in this mortal body, of that reunification. So, like I said, even watching a leaf fall to the ground can create that, can be a method. I go on long walks. That's a method for me to quiet my mind and look at the trees and get away from a screen and do all the things that I need to do to remember that I'm bigger than a guy sitting down typing at a screen all day. That there's something more to me. And so for me, psychedelics are a method, and a really interesting and unique and powerful method. And so good meditation, I've experienced that as well. But there's a Yowzer's sort of aspect to psychedelics because of the immediacy and then the resonance of the experience, and just the difference between the known reality, the known experienced reality that we consider our everyday waking consciousness, and the consciousness that's accessed, the field that's accessed through some of these chemicals. And so I had long really had a really deep respect for all of it. And over the last really 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot more publicity around psychedelics and also their health benefits. And so it was one of my colleagues, I was going on a trip to Asia, and right before I left, he sent me a lot of, I think the Tim Ferriss show, I think Michael Pollan was like working on his book, and there's like all of these things that were kind of entering the public consciousness around psychedelics. I ended up taking that with me to Asia, which was interesting, like reading all the literature on the plane about the clinical trials happening with psilocybin, and just became really, really interested in what I felt was a revolution of consciousness that we have the opportunity to take part in. Because, we heard all of it in the 60s, and things, I hope, are to a place where we know enough about it to really do it in a mature way. It's becoming accessible, and it's becoming less of a faux pas to talk about. And so I always respected it as a medicine, as a ancestral practice, but never as something for me. So I'd kind of held it at arm's length for a long time, and even saw like that medicine in my own kind of close social circles help people with long-term mental illness really turn a corner. So I was seeing things in my immediate circle. It's just like, wow, like this is really, really powerful medicine, and I'm so glad it exists, and I support it 100%. Has nothing to do with me. And that was true until it wasn't. And in the same way that it's ridiculous to tell a kid that you have to have this spontaneous mystical experience on demand, I think it's just as ridiculous to say, like, you really need to do mushrooms. Or nobody really needs to do anything except what their heart and their spirit is telling them to do. So it's proselytizing to do that. But when I was ready, I was in a place where whatever it was my perceived risk, whatever it was that I was afraid of, was not scarier than the situation I found myself in. That whatever the state of consciousness was that I was in at that moment, it was far worse than anything I could possibly be afraid of in my own mind. And because I took it so seriously and read a lot of the literature, I understood the range of possible outcomes and people really deeply reliving trauma that had been completely blocked off to them. And those things scared me because I had a lot in my childhood that, I had a fairly traumatic upbringing, and I was afraid of what that might reveal. And I think that's a rational fear. So I had to be in a place where whatever it was that I was going to uncover, whatever that boogeyman was, no longer scared me, because I was in a place where that's not scary to me anymore. That was the time when I opened myself up to psychedelics, and I had my first mushroom experience. And what it made really clear to me, it did illuminate quite a bit, but it wasn't, for me, I haven't yet had experience where I recovered a memory that I had lost, like completely new to me. But it certainly allowed me to be completely honest with myself about my own hang-ups. And to identify like the complex spider web of defense mechanisms that are woven around these areas of pain that never let anybody get to those. Nobody can get to them because it's so booby-trapped. For me, it's like somebody just came in and snapped their fingers and all those booby traps are gone. And now I'm just looking at the hurt. And all of those tricks that my ego, my personality would play on me to tell me, no, you've healed from that. Or, no, you're stronger because of that. No, keep that because you got to remember where you came from, or whatever it was that was taking up that storage that I had protected so much. All those protections were gone. And that's not an easy thing. I'm always just eternally grateful that I had the presence of both of you through that period of that first trip, and before, during, and after, because I always felt safe. That's I couldn't have allowed myself to really go that deep unless I felt completely safe, because it felt like I was completely disassembling. But then given the opportunity to put myself back together, with less parts, there's things you can leave out this time if you want to. And so I know whenever I put together like IKEA furniture, I have like 3 extra screws. I was like, where the hell are these supposed to go? Hopefully it doesn't collapse. So it was extremely difficult, but the rewards for that work have just, I can't really describe the doors that it opened up for me in terms of taking that back into my existing meditation practice. And then also then building a relationship with those plants, those medicines, in a way where we're having a conversation. And it's become really organic. So I've had 3 experiences now, and it's very easy for me to check in with myself about it, because I'm not treating it like a party drug. These are really intense kind of resets almost. And I think what happens neurologically is kind of precisely that. It's a reset of the default node network, and it allows you to choose a different path. You don't have to be addicted anymore if you don't want to that thought pattern or that substance or that behavior or whatever it is. But I know that I immediately start getting to work protecting whatever's left. And so I've yet to have an experience where it's like, no, you're good. There's always something there. It's like, hey, remember this? Like, you didn't actually really deal with it or let it go. And that's what I'm finding is that's not kind of the proper inner dialogue for it. It's less of a conflict, I think, and more of a relationship building. Because even though it's tough to see those parts of ourselves that we might think are ugly, it's incredibly important that we have a healthy relationship with them. So even not using language like I just did about, that are confrontational, but how do we invite them in and love them, not push them away or fight them? And then ultimately just let them go.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing how you process things. Feels like a very supportive place inside your being. You have a lot to offer other people by holding that space, I think.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. I'm a long-time listener and a first-time caller. So it's really quite an honor to speak with you today.
Where do you feel like you are with psychedelics now, like going forward after some of these experiences? You talk a little bit about how you're integrating it, what direction you're moving with that, and with some of these other practices that you've added to your life since then.
I'm just in listening mode with all of my methods, to be honest. My relationship with meditation is constantly evolving. My relationship with other mystical traditions is on again, off again. It's just as I cross these little streams sometimes, it's like, okay, my raft for this one seems to be that I need to open my heart. And so can I worship something myself? Can I worship myself? I can. Okay, let's open up the heart. Can I do a compassion meditation where I am thinking about people I love and just opening my heart? Sometimes I really do actually need to try to push this through my rational brain system somehow. So how can I do that? Well, let me do some concentration meditation, right? So it's all just, where am I at? And what do I need to cross this river or stream or whatever? And I think sometimes the answer is going to be, all right, dude, you need to do some mushrooms. Sometimes it's, you need to take a walk. Or sometimes it's, fuck it, go to India. I don't know. Whatever it is that thing is, I'm going to do it. And so in that way, I don't really have to kind of analyze it too much. So, but I will say it's in my list of methods, and I'm sure from time to time that the answer is going to be, yeah, let's check in with this. Or the universe is going to say, here's an opportunity to do this thing. How does this feel to you? And then I can say yes or no. It's all beautiful, and they're not mutually exclusive, which I love. I can love Jesus and love psychedelics at the same time, and that's okay. It feels like freedom.
Don't a lot of Buddhist teachers say no on the psychedelics? Does that feel like an aligned teaching, or is that meddlesome?
So there are the 5 precepts that we take. And one of them is, it's often translated as, I undertake to keep the precept to keep from taking drugs and alcohol. But the literal translation of that precept is that I undertake to keep the precept to abstain from taking substances that lead me astray.
Okay, that's kind of a big difference.
Yeah. And then it mentions 2 specific substances, one which they know is a grain alcohol and one which nobody actually knows what it is. It's like, basically, don't do these things. Things like this, don't do it, right? So if you're absolutely drunk, good luck meditating. And like, it's also like, even though, like you said, through Buddhist teachers, it can be presented as a commandment and such, there are no commandments in Buddhism. These are just like, hey, if you want to awaken, here's some tips. If it makes you feel better to take a precept or to make a vow, here are some words. But the words aren't going to do it. You actually have to do it. So, it's not a good idea to be drunk off your ass and then try to meditate. You're not going to get very far. Probably fall asleep, which isn't the worst thing in the world. So I think a lot of it is a translation thing. I've never felt any sort of pressure about that. I've talked openly with my Sangha about psychedelics, with a Buddhist monk from Burma. I think really the most pushback that I've ever heard on it was just like, it's like jhana, but it's not the real jhana. So jhana are these levels, like there's different levels of consciousness that one can achieve through meditation. And so as you move through 1st and through 4th jhana, you kind of get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. So it's the idea that like, it's a change in consciousness that is like the change in consciousness you can accomplish through meditation, but it's not the real one, which is still a little judgmental, because like, what's real and what's not real. And, at least for me, I'm only going to be able to meditate for 2 or 3 hours. So even if I get into a really deep sort of state of consciousness that's, quote, real, it's actually going to last me less time than a mushroom trip is going to. So which is more real? Like, how are we measuring all of these things? And so I think, again, like, there are just many doors to these different states of consciousness. It's our birthright. It's our lineage to be able to access these things, whether it's through some plant or through some spiritual practice or, fasting or praying or chanting or spinning around, whirling or screaming or whatever. It is our right to know who we are.
Really radical. It's dangerous words.
Yeah. I mean, if the game's not worth the candle, then why even do it? Like, I need a worldview that keeps me here. Yeah. It's got to be interesting for me, or why would I even stick around? It's not interesting enough for me to kind of be a little insignificant being at the, cowering under the wrath of some unseen God. It's much more interesting for me to think that maybe I'm in on it, and maybe we're all in on it. And then maybe we could just all play it with a wink and a nod.
If you want to connect with Kasem, I put his email address in the show notes. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at maurajames.com. More podcasts there, of course. And you can also watch the documentary that Daniel and I put out recently, The Charnel Ground, for free as well. I love you, and I'm so grateful that you're holding space for compassion and connection in this confused world. We need you. I'm really glad you're here.